Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode number 129. And my guest in this episode is Dan Halpern. And Dan is a licensed professional counselor working out of the state of Colorado. And he has a multimodal approach to healing and therapy. And we discuss that in this conversation, and we open up a number of other subjects that revolve or orbit around the ideas of self-care, transformation, and healing. And I've very much enjoyed this conversation. Dan is a gentle and beautiful soul, and I very much appreciated the time I had with him. So I hope you enjoy the conversation as well, and I will have information for Dan down below because he has a website and a practice called the Integrated Self Counseling. So we'll make sure all of that's down below. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. And I'd like to welcome Dan Halpern to the IdeaCast interview series. Dan and I have been back and forth in a couple of pre-meet conversations and chatting on email, so I'm looking forward to what we're going to create in this conversation. So Dan, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. I'm glad to have you here because I think we're going to have a good conversation. Also, I would like to welcome the YouTube, and I always forget to welcome the Spotify. I just started Spotify about 4 weeks ago. So welcome to YouTube and Spotify audience, listeners, watchers. Glad to have you there, especially my subscribers. Thank you guys. I always appreciate the fact that you've subscribed to this channel and you watch the content. I very much appreciate that. So what I'd like to do, Dan, is have both myself and the audience get more familiar with your background in terms of perhaps a little education background and what you do and what inspired you to bring yourself to this point in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. So I'll just dive right in. I'm going to do a little Tarantino style. I'll tell you where I am right now, then I'll go back to the past. Right now, I am a somatic trauma therapist and a spiritual counselor. I also offer somatic coaching healing sessions worldwide. And how I got into this, I would say that it started through curiosity.
Hmm.
When I was 15, I had a world literature professor sophomore year in high school. I read Siddhartha and the Tao of Pooh, and I just said, that sounds interesting. I'll try meditating. And just started kind of sitting in my own room, exploring what meditation was about. And that path led me to study Buddhism. I eventually got a bachelor's degree from Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado, where I'm still living nearby, and basically a degree in comparative mysticism. So I became more interested in not just what are the dogmas and rules and regulations of religious traditions, but what are the actual experiences? What are the felt sense, the real life experiences that some of the great mystics and any practitioner can have by using the practices and the paths laid out by world wisdom traditions. So I've studied that in a lot of different ways. And then that eventually led me to the counseling profession because I wanted to find ways that, well, I see that there's a lot of overlap between a spiritual path and a healing path.
Hmm.
They are both moving towards self-actualization, moving towards getting real with oneself. And that means cleaning up one's own psyche, the wounds, addressing the pains and the blocks that we have personally. And I think that Western psychology has a lot of tools and techniques and an orientation that can be really helpful for kind of shedding away the layers of blocks to help someone live the most enlightened life they can, to use the Buddhist language.
Hmm.
So, um, so I find this interesting niche for myself here where I can offer both therapeutic help for someone who is just struggling with anxiety or depression or low self-esteem. And then if it's helpful for them, I'm always happy to bring in some of the sense of what are we doing here? Like some of these existential questions, what is this life? And how can we orient to the mystery of it? Because Western Cartesian science can't explain all of it. As Shakespeare said, there's more to heaven and earth than in our philosophies. So there's always some bit of mystery here. And I think that world wisdom traditions and religious paths, but especially the contemplative or mystical side of them, has a lot of wisdom that can help flesh out and fill out our philosophies and our ways of orienting to just being a human and living our everyday lives. So that's what I'm really interested in, is bringing in ways to just live the best lives we can from whatever lineage or path that wisdom can be found. And for me, that's through Western psychology, somatic work, parts work. We can get into all of this details, and then the spiritual side as well when there's an openness to that.
Yeah, beautiful. In that, in what you said, I want to capture the idea that spirituality works with what we could call a mystery, or what you said, is the mystery. And I would love to see more of that come to the fore in, excuse me, spiritual or religious practices. There seems to be, and I typically indict the Enlightenment period when we in the West, we in Europe, uh, became very empirical, very sterile, very propositionally oriented, and we wanted to get rid of mysteries. We wanted to get rid of the surprise, right? That could be waiting for us around the metaphysical corner or whatever. And so I appreciate that you said that, because I think allowing space for the unknown, or for us to recognize our station as humans, and not anything superior to that, that we can afford ourselves that space for, or allow a relationship with mystery. Also, I love in what you just said, the convergence of a spiritual practice and, again, a more Western, more empirically grounded psychological set of utilities that can help us, or heuristics that can help us with transformative and transcendent experience, or phenomenology, or however we want to say that. But thank you for that, because I think we can go on a spectrum. We can go into a very sterile, very mechanical kind of like, well, you're just a bag of chemistry, and just pour a little of this in there, and don't worry, mom and dad were, these kind of things, and we'll try to work that out. But so I appreciate that there is an integrated potential for integration there. So which leads me to a question, and you and I had talked about this, so it's not a surprise question, but the idea of a good therapeutic practice, as administered by a clinician, somebody who's qualified to do the work. What is the essence of that work? It's such a diverse field, psychology, but let's hear from you about your feeling good about, and having faith in the ability to have that become a transformative and transcendent experience for someone. Transformative.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can absolutely be transcendent as well. And
Hmm.
also can be very imminent, the other
Hmm.
side of that spectrum of just getting more into ourselves. So that is actually what I think is kind of, to get to that question. I love this question. The that there are principles that apply to any kind of therapeutic process. And for me, I kind of turn to these sort of three principles, and can be summed up in a real simple phrase, and that's listen, yes, and.
Mm.
So the first principle there I want to speak to is listen. The first thing that I think is needed for any healing process. And I want to say to all the listeners too, this is something that I do, and I think a lot of healers will do, holding space in a therapeutic container, but also something that any person can do for their own selves. And my goal as a therapist is to make myself obsolete, to help other people have these tools to be able to do this themselves. So in a therapeutic container or in your own self-inquiry and work in your own life, I think that the first and most important thing is to cultivate this ability to listen, and to not just listen so that you can plan what you want to say next, not just listen to find where you can fit your agenda in, but really just listening to be open to all of reality.
Mm.
That includes, what is someone else saying? What are the circumstances? What are the needs in the space around? And I think a lot of people have this tendency that it's, well, different tendencies, but for some people, it's easier to hear what are the needs that somebody else has than it is to also then listen to yourself. What needs do I have? I know for me, that's been some of my own personal work, is to recenter myself in my own story, because I'm very good at attending to other people. So that's a bit of work for me, is to also listen to myself. And then within that listening, we can also listen to more of the wider world. There are forces that are at play, again, to some of this mystery, but also some systems have really mapped out very well that there are things happening in the world, in the universe, that also affect the collective conscious, the collective unconscious. And we can listen to all of that to see what is really appropriate, what's really needed. How can I fit into this symphony? You know, if you just walk in blasting heavy metal because that's your favorite music, but there's a symphony playing right now, it, you know, unless you've worked that out with the San Fran Symphony Orchestra and you get Metallica and you've really honed it in all right, then it'll work. But you need
Yeah,
to find the way to attune to work together. It doesn't always work out.
yeah.
So I think that first step is just listening. You know, what's here? What is actually here? And from there, that second principle of yes. So listen, yes, and the second notion of yes is to actually accept what's here. So we can listen and say, okay, yeah, I'm mad that this thing happened to me. Now, part of this yes piece is not just saying, okay, this happened, but actually feeling the impact of it. And this is where the therapeutic process can really be so helpful. I think a lot of people have a hard time or build up an idea that if I feel the emotion about this issue, it's going to overwhelm me. It's going to drown me. I'm not going to be able to get back out of it. It's going to be too much. And there's intelligence to that, yeah, you do need to have certain tools and capacity to be able to know how to breathe through something like that. But it's not that hard. Once you learn to do that, then you can feel the emotions that you need to feel about, yeah, this thing happened. Once you let yourself feel it, it's called sequencing or processing, that the emotion will actually move through and process through your system. And then it often leaves in the form of yawning, shaking, shivering, burping. Uh, it's like emotions have a short lifespan, you know, maybe 90 seconds, maybe 3 minutes,
Mhm.
if you just let yourself feel it from the neck down. And a lot of times, what people are feeling when they're feeling overwhelmed by a feeling, I believe it's more that we're feeling the resistance to feeling that emotion. So it's not a full yes. It's, I don't like this thing that happened and I wish it didn't happen. And that's as far as we go. And instead, to be able to say, I don't like this thing that happened. I wish it didn't happen. And it really hurts. And to breathe into that and to
Mhm.
feel the sorrow, to feel the violation, to feel the pain, to feel, or even the elation, to be able to feel pleasure. Sometimes that can be overwhelming too, to feel positive states. So actually letting yourself experience it in an embodied way is necessary to actually meeting life. Not just from a conceptual, I understand it, but no, now I'm here with it. And now I'm going through it. And now it's working on me. And now I'm being changed by it. And now I'm changing it together. And we're working together with life. So we listen to what's real. We then let ourselves feel what's real. Let's listen, yes, and. And then the and here has a lot. And first, I just want to say that yes, and this is a principle from improv comedy or improv music, in jazz music. You always find the yes of what is happening, and then you add an and. So comedy doesn't
Mhm.
work if someone says, you know, someone throws something at you and you say, you didn't throw anything at me. I'm gonna tell you a different story. It's disjointed. You always have to, in improv, acknowledge what another actor is doing,
Okay.
say yes to that, but then you add something to it.
Hmm.
So the and piece is where we can get a lot of different techniques. So say something painful has happened in your life. First, you listen and say, okay, what was this other person doing? What am I feeling about it? Then let yourself feel it. And then the and is what's needed here to bring some more balance or further the story, or how can this be generative towards some movement of growth? And so there we use a lot of different interventions, things like parts work, talking to the inner child that needs attention, talking to the inner adolescent that needs to have the permission to like, what are the rules of swearing on this podcast, Justin?
Oh, you can go. Yeah, whatever. I'll put a thing on if we don't need to get too crazy, but yeah,
No.
you can use bad words. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to ask because I think there's a real power to a practice, the fuck off practice. That
Right.
sometimes people need to be able to say that. And there's a lot of confusion about anger, that to be angry is a bad feeling
Mm,
because then I'll get violent. And there's a lot of space between being angry and being violent.
mm,
There's an importance to being able to say in a healthy, contained way not even to someone else, but just in your own system to just say, fuck off,
Mm-hmm.
get the fuck out of my space. And using that kind of charged language, I find can be helpful to galvanize that energy and let that energy move through you so you don't need to get violent with someone else. So different interventions, different things that we can be doing. Sometimes it's a meditation practice, sometimes it's exploring, what are the minimums? If you want to change your lifestyle, you're not just going to start going to the gym 7 days a week if you've never been before. Maybe, what are the minimums? Like you want to do 2 or 3 days a week and 10 minutes of walking a day. Find different creative solutions to apply that, yes, this is the situation now, and here's how we can move forward in a way that's, that you can actually achieve. So it's a pretty rambly answer, but that's essentially what I find is the core of the healing work is just listening to what's needed, being
Excuse
able
me.
to feel into it.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I'll say too that happens in the therapeutic container is that we're always working with attachment. And just by me being a witness or another therapist or coach or whoever holding space, we're not just helping one person feel better in themselves, but we're helping people feel better in relationship. And we are relational beings. So our nervous systems are always attuning to each other and to the stimulation in the world around us.
Mm-hmm.
So by having another well-adjusted, attuned nervous system to meet you, there can be this attunement that happens that extends that sense of security and safety and okayness to be your authentic self, not just on the meditation cushion, but then also out in the world when you're interacting with others. So that's always underlying and why I think therapy is such a beautiful process is that it's helping someone become more their individual self, but doing it together. And that is the hardest part and also the most rewarding and the most transformative is when we can grow and change and transform and still maintain relationships, still be in connection, even while we're also honoring our own autonomy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A lot there.
Yeah,
So,
not
so
a problem.
grant me some charity. I even wrote a couple notes. I'm like beep 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 because I'm 55 and I can't remember everything anymore. Um, One thing to speak broadly to what you just said, I love the idea of relationality and you as the therapist, the clinician that goes in with this person into a what I would call a sacred space because they are having to accept their vulnerability to then pull things out, like to maybe pull out a shadowy things, ugly things that have occurred, and you are there as a co-experiencer or re-experiencer, or you're at least somebody there in the capacity of responding to and reacting to that release or that inquiry or things that are going on. And I read an article, I think maybe a few months or a year ago, about there's the idea of the transference, countertransference in therapy, but that they were saying that, there's caveats. There's a lot of caveats to that, but there's also some good things, some good mm, things to be mined from that you can recognize if you're doing your therapy. And I was hearing that a little bit in what you were saying, and that you as the therapist who are guiding this person or working with them can recognize something, and then you do the alchemy and say, okay, what's coming up for you, or however you handle a response to sort of like a yes and situation, but that you are using you're crafting your own psyche and your own sort of psycho-emotional status to help facilitate that. And I like that because again, that speaks to relationality, which is very humane and very maybe heart-centered, if you will, to use that as a metaphor. So and then I think that I'll stop there and see how you want to respond to that. I could make a couple other things, but
Yeah,
see what you
yeah.
think about that.
Thanks. Yeah, one thing that comes up in that is, I have a 4.5-year-old, and it's crazy how frequently my wife and I will ask this question: is this normal? If anyone has kids and your kid is doing something, is this normal that my kid's doing this? Um, and I think that we're constantly looking for that validation. And in life, you look at what's happening in the world right now, take anything, life is okay with it. you know,
Mm-hmm.
life, the universe, the mystery, it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
But we look in the social sphere, and, what if I say something? What if I tell you that I'm having this feeling? What if uh, I don't want to go along with what you're saying? Then will that be okay or will I be rejected? And to get that reflection in a therapeutic process that, no, it's okay. Like you can tell me that your deepest fear. You can say out loud that this is like something you've been holding shame about for so long. And some of these things, they do grow in the dark and they get bigger when we don't share them. I'm actually trying to remember the exact quote, but we had mentioned Gabor Mate before we started recording here, and something that I've heard him say is that the opposite of um, it's either the opposite of trauma or the opposite of addiction is connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think whatever he said, both of those ideas I think could be pretty true. That connection brings about more healing. It makes that sense of something that's so shameful or so painful become more able to hold, more manageable. And you don't need to hold all that pain all by yourself. So just having another human there to validate and say that's okay, that is normal, that's fine, and life's not going to kick you out, and I'm not going to kick you out either. That can just help a system settle to be able to move past it. I think
Mm-hmm.
life wants to keep moving, and that's really one of the big goals is what's stopping us from moving. And sometimes we move not just to continue growing and hustling and grinding and reaching for higher levels of success, but just sometimes moving forward means now I can settle and rest. And so whatever is needed, just having that reflection from another human, I think helps us keep going to that next step of what is needed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was when we were talking about Gabor and what you paraphrased him. I thought of Richard Rohr, I think was the author of this quote, and somebody can correct me if that's not right, but there was the idea of the cult of innocence, wherein we must not enmesh ourselves or engage with that shadowy part of ourselves with it. We must constantly strive to be shiny, happy, light people, and stay away from that. And Richard Rohr is kind of a Buddhist Catholic, if that's okay to say that. But for him to present that, I think speaks a little bit to what you were saying, in that we can in a safe space with someone who we can trust, to pull that out and to not feel to conform to a societal normative to, always be happy, and all that kind of stuff. So I like that idea. And what you presented, that Gabor Mate had said is that, it's okay to have that thing come up or those things come up. Maybe not in a shopping mall or a grocery store, but under in a safe space, in safe conditions where you as the therapist are holding that space for them and that they're perfectly safe. And that leads to a question, not to be cheesy and just jump right into another question, but it was something that you had mentioned, and it was about the patient or client to have to actually relive or revisit a traumatic experience. Could be a litany of them in their history, but so would you open that up and we'll weave that into what was just what you just mentioned?
Yeah. So I hear you asking this question, like, do people have to relive their traumas
Mm-hmm.
to recover from them? I think there's different therapeutic approaches to that
Okay.
would have some would say that no, it's not at all important. Some would say that yes, you do have to like, go back there. Here's the thing. I think um, that life will take you back there, and it may not be the same way, but a certain trigger, a certain issue comes up in your life that's reminiscent of that past trauma. And now we are right back in that traumatized state. So it might be helpful just to have name one working definition for trauma. I think of it as anything it's the body's response to an overwhelming situation.
Mm.
So trauma is not the thing that happened to you, it's how it lives, whatever happened lives in your body. So for one person, just public speaking can be traumatic. For another
Mm.
person, that's not at all traumatic. But what happens when there's a trauma is that the body shuts down around that overwhelming situation, and then it gets stuck in the body. And we will keep living out that story in some way until we can move through it.
Mhm.
So I think of it kind of like a spiral that, it may not be the same exact situation, but we might keep finding ourselves with similar partners who all have those same belittling or abusive tendencies that maybe a father or mother had. Or we keep finding ourselves in different jobs that keep failing, and we keep reliving some core issue of, well, whatever it is, like
Mhm.
any. So life is giving us constant opportunities to work through our core issues and deepest pains. And sometimes it is helpful to go back to where that originated, to see, what's happening now, how is it reminiscent to something that happened when I was younger, or even something that happened to your parents or ancestors, because there is such thing as intergenerational trauma, and
Mhm.
genetics is a whole field you can explore. Once, so yeah, I think that there is a place for going back and exploring what are the roots of it, and then also by doing that, not just to do it over in your mind and re-traumatize, but there's safe ways that a skilled professional can hold to titrate and pendulate and go into the pain, but then come back out of it and resource and keep building your nervous system capacity to tolerate the pain that comes up, the charge that arises. When you do that in a safe way, then the the intensity of it can start to release. And what really happens, one of the most profound things is to acknowledge that, yeah, something terrible did happen to you. Something overwhelming happened, and it's not happening now. It's a different situation if it is still happening. And, finding ways to get to safety is so important if that's possible. And then if that is possible, we're talking about past traumas that like single incidents or even ongoing incidents that are now no longer happening. It's really just a matter of updating the psyche, updating yourself to see that, okay, there's not a threat around me. Like even looking around yourself 360 degrees and seeing, yeah, there's no one in my space who's going to punish me for saying what I want or being too much. So it's kind of taking that part of ourself that got stuck in the traumatic situation and letting it grow up with us to the current state, like upgrading the software, upgrading the system to being more present that now maybe that traumatic event taught us how to shut off and always have our walls up. And that was intelligent when we were younger. We might have needed that to survive an
Mhm.
impossible situation. But now those walls aren't as necessary. It's actually now they're impeding your life. It's like the storm is past and you're still keeping all the shutters drawn. It's like you can open it up. You can relate with life differently now. So there is a value to going back into trauma, and also uh, we can do that, even just with the everyday material of life, um, to an extent.
Mhm.
But I'm not sure. Does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, yeah, it does. And so I'm, excuse me, thinking about just using myself as an example, that to explore that, I wonder that, in the beginning, it especially I like to think that my life was just a series of Machiavellian treacheries and not trauma. It's like the upbringing that I had was not traumatic, but it was just sort of treacherous. And but I'm being silly at my own expense, but the idea of somebody who really did experience a deep trauma of, we won't talk about the forbidden things that happen to children, because I don't want an audience member to have to, have to contemplate that. But the idea that we have to pull something that dark out of ourselves at first has got to be overwhelming. But what I would see is once you cross that bridge, that and again, in the right space with the right person who is prepared for you in to receive what will happen, is that in the next step or the next approach or whatever, that as you said, when something arises, that the feelings will happen and that we'll move through it. That maybe the light at the end of the tunnel, or the whatever's on the other side of the mountain, that you can expect that the next iteration will not be that traumatic. So am I intuiting incorrectly, or can it be that if we break that ice and pull that thing out, and then the next time it happens, that we can expect that, it won't be so bad, and that we can then, like you said, take little bites at it. And well, you didn't say that directly, but the titration and the pendulum. So what do you think about that? Is that
Yeah.
a good intuition, or
No,
is that
yeah, I think that is right on. That
okay?
that is what happens. One way of kind of thinking that I like to think of therapy is that it's kind of like a nervous system gym. And we take this safe container where there's not any threats, we're just here talking. And in that space, we can let ourselves feel the charge in our nervous system. So I'm using that word charge because that's how it often feels. You can imagine, like, if you're going to skydive, getting ready to jump out of an airplane, you might be feeling a 10 out of 10 on a like 1 to 10 scale of a charge in your nervous system.
Right.
You can imagine lying on a beach, if that's something you enjoy, that might be a 1 out of 10.
Hmm.
So in therapeutic container, we can practice leaning into that, even just by talking about certain events, it brings up some charge. So then we practice, what are some tools we can use to feel it? And, both tools, things you can do to help support yourself. Like, just one simple thing is just bringing your hands to your perimeter, and you can pat, you can squeeze like down
Hmm.
your arms and legs,
Come into
just being in some
contact.
contact, feeling like pressing your feet into the ground, feeling some solidity there. These are things, simple tools you can use if you're feeling overwhelmed, pressing against a wall. There's a lot more that I have an online course I can share. It's called Feel Good on my website that
Hmm.
has a lot more of those kinds of tools. Um, but what that's doing is also not just learning the tools, but also gaining the confidence that you can do it. You can go
Hmm.
through it. You can feel that painful thing and talk about it out loud, and you can breathe, and then you can be okay. And what that's doing is it's building your capacity to tolerate the charge in the nervous system when difficult things happen. So that way, when your partner says something that upsets you, instead of throwing a dish at the wall, you can be okay and say, oh, wow, I'm getting activated, and I'm not going to get violent here. I'm going to do something different. And maybe take a walk, maybe engage in the conversation, maybe apologize, maybe explore more of what's going on.
Hmm.
But we can't do any of that if the hindbrain, if the survival mechanism comes in and we feel like this charge is too much and it's too overwhelming and I need to fight or flee or fawn. Instead, we can build the capacity to tolerate the charge so that you can choose how you want to live. Yeah, that is a process and a practice.
And to those in the audience listening, if you're dealing with things, and you've been apprehensive to engage with a practitioner or a therapist, that might be encouraging news, that you can dip your toes in that water, and then really with the safe space, get in there and get in that pool. I'll stretch the metaphor, get in that pool, and because what's on the other side will likely be worth what you were saying, like the charge, that we're concerned. Yeah, it's like pulling a band-aid off, or that first haircut that you see. Sometimes you'll see 3-year-olds in the chair, they're just absolutely terrified because scissors and creepy guy. Yeah. And relative to their capacity, I get that. I don't remember if I freaked out in my first haircut, but I've seen it, and I'm like, I get that because given the context, it's can be upsetting. Yeah, and it can be something you're not prepared for, or you don't have a prior history to say, oh, I'll be fine, I'll be okay. So
Yeah,
that takes a
absolutely.
leap of faith, I guess. Yeah. I've got a couple kind of Justin questions that I've thought of that we can do, and if we can do pass, or we can engage. So if it's something you'd rather not talk about, that's cool. Um, and they're related to therapy. So when someone is entering into or approaching that transformative process, uh, Um, Cultivating self-awareness and authenticity. And we I think we touched on that when we were going to talk about questions. So this could be a segue to that too. How, as a therapist, can that be penetrated? So, we could go to an extreme and talk about people who are really enmeshed in narcissism, and there's this sort of protective persona that will firewall, vulnerability and things like that. But maybe not that extreme, wherein someone may just genuinely be motivated because of a lot, years of misery and being upset. But how do we crack that shell of entering into, again, authenticity or a self-awareness that affords them the honest and authentic language that will bring again that charge to the fore or allow for the process to begin? How do you break that ice?
Yeah. You know, it's it's always here.
Mm,
Authenticity, like being authentic is just a matter of saying, what's here. It comes back to that listening principle.
hmm
And in that, just asking the question, what are you noticing right now? Well, I'm noticing that I'm bored. Great. That's your authentic truth right now.
mm,
What are you noticing? I'm noticing that I don't want to answer this question. Like, great. You have you're having a boundary. Wonderful. That's your authentic self. Our I think there's something that we try. So coming back to this notion about the Enlightenment, and how we wanted to get rid of the mystery
hmm
and nail things down. I think this is a central point of modernity, is trying to get to these concrete answers that we can understand reality and put it on a shelf and say, now I get it and I'm done. And we can try to do that with ourselves too, to say, who am I? What am I? What's the right answer to that question? And I think that it's much more of a verb than a noun, and life is much more of a verb than a noun. And there's not one answer to your authentic self. There's a constellation and like a complex moving structure that sometimes your authentic self shows up in this way and shows up in a different way in a different situation.
hmm
And so uh, coming into self-awareness is just the only time you can be self-aware is in the present moment. So whether I'm in therapy with someone or just in everyday life, to be authentic, it's a practice of just what are you noticing now? What are you
hmm
needing now? And in a similar way, I also think it's important to think of balance itself, that balance is also not a verb. I'm sorry, balance is not a noun, it is a verb.
hmm hmm
Balance is something that is constantly shifting. Like in one moment, to be balanced means you need to be more active and do more work. And sometimes to be balanced means you need to take a step back and give yourself more rest. So again, you can find these practices to have these principles that what's needed to recognize your authenticity is to just notice what is happening right now. Like honestly, how do you feel about what's going on in this moment right now? And sometimes that can be difficult. It can say, well, actually, if I acknowledge what's going on, I might acknowledge that I don't like it. And I don't want to have to overhaul my entire life because of that. And what I would say to that is that you don't have to overhaul everything all at once. If there's something you don't like, once you acknowledge it, then it actually becomes workable. And then it's, well, okay, maybe I don't like this aspect of my job, but I do like this aspect of my job. How can I lean more into the things that I do like and lessen the things I don't like? Is that possible? Does that mean going to part-time and finding some other kind of work? Does it mean going back to school? There's infinite options of ways to be creative in life, but the only way to do that is by acknowledging our truth. And
hmm
so knowing that truth is also changing all the time, I think it also gives more permission and more space that, you can find your authentic truth in this moment and be open to maybe it'll be different tomorrow. Maybe in this moment you really don't want to go to that party, and then time comes around and you really do want to go.
hmm
So yeah, I think it's important to have flexibility to not nail it down as a final answer, but an ongoing process of what it means to be authentic.
I like that it's context and situationally dependent, and that we we recognize that and we grant ourselves that. And that leads me to wonder, in the culture at large, is that, and I'll speak just for us being residents of the US, is that something that we see being cultivated or encouraged to have a flexible selfness, a selfing, as you pointed out as a verb, and or is it more that we have to reify ourselves and be this constant whatever iteration of or frame that we can and be that self. What do you think that the culture at large is promoting or trying to proliferate? Are we, in messaging and marketing and things like that, are we affording ourselves that capacity to be fluid and transformatively inclined when, like you said, situationally, it's best for us to present ourselves in a particular way?
Yeah, I think some aspects of culture are moving that forward.
Okay.
Um, and I think a lot of culture is pretty stuck in more ethnocentric ways of just saying this is the way it is, and this is who we are, and this is what it is, and we're on this side of the line. See a lot of that. Um, but I think there's more progressive thinking beyond the dualism and the binaries of most popular culture. And I think it
Mm.
is happening in pockets. It's happening in circles, and in subcultures. And there's pushback from the mainstream culture as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I wonder, excuse me, as we are social creatures, there are outliers, of course, but I think in the fat part of the bell curve, we don't want to uh, step out too much or be instigators necessarily. And so the pressure to be predictable in that sense that I will show up as this identity, um, and the idea of identity beyond self. So maybe I'll get things confused here, but so there is the selving, which could be the authentic but uh, flexible or fluid self. And then there is an identity, which could be more of an extended persona, which is that which we use to please or help the group feel coherent and cohesive. And I think I'm leading to a point where like things like TikTok and Instagram and things like that can kind of scuttle that a little bit. And so for an individual who may be listening and maybe feeling some of that pressure, like, well, who the hell am I, or who am I to be in this moment, and that contextual confusion that may arise. What would you suggest in the way of a grounding practice that could help them to feel more secure in rather than that sort of one guy I follow calls it profilicity, like you're more like your Instagram profile than you are that person that gets up in the morning and is seeking to fit within a frame of cultural cooperation, all that kind of stuff. So what would you say could be a good grounding practice for somebody who's like,
Yeah.
who am I today? Or who
Yeah.
should I be today?
Right. I appreciate this question a lot. I think you're getting at this way that our culture does put the cart before the horse.
Mm,
We, what gets presented to us is a certain way of being and say, be this person or be more like this person and show up and, have this label. And that I think is that's the cart there. That's like what you can say after you've already done something. The reason that people that you see that you love, like celebrities or figures that you follow and speakers, teachers, whoever that is doing something that you like, you can put adjectives on them and describe them because they're doing what they do, not because they are that thing. So the first and most important thing is just to actually be attuned and aligned with what you're wanting, with what your authentic expression is. After you have done that for a while and you've created a pattern of that, then you can put a label on top of it and say, well, this is who I am.
mm,
But if you try to do it the other way, I don't think it's going to work. Then you're going to be trying to fit yourself into an idea, into a box, into a role that may or may not actually be the truest expression of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two practices I would offer to someone who's trying to figure out, who am I?
Mm-hmm.
The first practice is just a silent sitting practice of just tuning into your breath. It can be helpful to close your eyes because, our eyes are open. We're getting a lot of stimulation from the eyes, a lot of messaging,
Mm-hmm.
just from, commercials, from branding, from everything that's all around us. So if you close your eyes, then you can kind of gather your energy back to yourself. And you can imagine it like going on a date with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
where the person sitting across from you, but in this case, the person that you are sitting with yourself, that's the most important person in the world. So let yourself just set a timer for 5 minutes, sit down and just get to know yourself. And if your mind is really active and running around, the monkey mind, they call it, then just notice that. Be like, wow, isn't this amazing that I'm a human being here on Earth and my mind is thinking about all this stupid, mundane stuff. Like, how cool, how weird, how interesting. And, just be present with yourself as you are. Actually listen just to yourself and see, I feel I'm tired. Great. What else do you notice? I'm noticing that I'm really annoyed at what this person said to me today. It's great. All right. What else am I noticing? I notice my back hurts. Okay, great. What else are you noticing? I'm really excited about this thing I'm doing this weekend. Just be present with yourself and see what is your authentic truth. And I think so often we do need to do practices and activities to hear what we're thinking and feeling because we're surrounded by so much noise and stimulation all the time that we need to go out of our way, out of the culture's way to not hear the commercial when we're pumping gas, to not hear the podcast that we're, constantly putting on, which, I do that too and love it. And also sometimes I just need to turn things off to tune into myself. So that's a sitting, simple, quiet practice. Another practice is to simply just invite your mind to take a back seat and let your body move however it wants to.
Mm.
And this can be really difficult for people in our culture, I think, that might have more of a sedentary lifestyles. We're not following a yoga flow with specific movements to do, but just ask your body, how do I want to move? And don't think about it and then do it. Just let your body move and see what happens if your arm wants to lead something, or if your leg wants to lead something. If your neck could lead you, how would your neck move your body? And once you start doing that, then you find, oh, it feels good to stretch this way and then to stretch it this way. And doing that is another way of just attuning to a more bottom up, kind of embodied sense of your authenticity. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it can be really, really fun and free, and you find yourself in all kinds of great stretches that actually feel really helpful. So yeah, those are two practices, two ways of starting to starting to practice listening to yourself so that you can act in a way that is authentic to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think something that keeps showing up in this conversation, I want to bring it more explicitly to the fore, is the idea, and I follow some CogSci people and telling you about that woman that's coming on as a guest, and I'm like, I've got to research really heady things that she does. But anyway, this person speaks to embodied cognition, and it's so they kick around, and so they talk about the fact that the brain is great, the brain does a lot, but that it is a unitary system. And so in our conversation, we see these signs showing up, and some of what you just said presents this as well. When we talk about dualism, that we could maybe think again in a more holistic sense about mind body. There's no solid line. There's no real cutoff. And what you were talking about, letting the body just be in concert with, again, putting that executive monkey mind kind of thing in the background. I really like that. I just wanted to stress that a little bit to say that if we think about this, because we tend to, again, that the Cartesian dualism, that there is the homuncular brain that is the executive that does all these things, and the body's just the slave that, responds to, and to some degree, the brain is doing this gesticulation, it's ordering that, but it's to me, it's reciprocal, it's relational. And I love that that could be emphasized in our appreciation of not selving so much, but being and knowing the body, knowing our somatic register, and also then knowing our somatic history, and that we do embody trauma and we do embody the stress that we onboard in life. So that's a tangent, but I just wanted to recognize what you have been saying throughout this conversation. We talked about somatic healing and things like that. So and then to extend into the mindfulness practice that you just suggested, I think this is cross-generational, but the idea to tag on one more thing is that kind of pressure to belong, pressure so in other words, what we just covered, but the felt sense of exclusion or repercussion for not and this happens probably a lot more with teens and adolescents, and then maybe wanes off into our 20s and 30s. And by the time you get to my age, I could care less. I could give a shit what anybody thinks about it. So I don't feel like I have to belong to anything. But it's very real for people who are entering into adult normative social structures. And the idea, everything you just covered, maybe we could incorporate that, what teens and adolescents go through, like, oh my God, I am going to be cast out from my clique or my group or the in people, whatever it is. And that could be very upsetting too. So if you want to respond to that, or we can find something else, but as
Yeah.
an amendment to everything you just said, that maybe that practice that you just spoke to could be something that could help somebody who's younger, who's like, I'm dealing with my peer pressure niche population that I want so much to be a part of.
Yeah.
And here's a spoiler: in 20 years, you won't give a crap about those people. But here we go.
But it is important when you're going through it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it is. It is. I'm not trivializing it anyway, because I remember that. So,
No, yeah, and it's true too that you get perspective as you go through it, but those are formative experiences that can be really painful. Um, so I read a Brene Brown quote actually that
mm.
I loved, that she said that fitting in is the opposite of belonging.
I love it.
Yeah, because belonging is like you have a place in this world.
Hmm.
It's okay to be here, and you look in the world. I mean, we need a diverse ecosystem, and fitting in is kind of like, well, let's all become the same and let me dress like the other people are dressing and talk like the other people are talking and do the things the other people are doing.
Hmm.
And it's, let's all become very similar and become the same, or yeah. So belonging, I think, is like authentic belonging. It's more that you can be different, that you can
Hmm.
be your unique expression of life. That being said, we are social beings. We develop socially, we develop in relationship, and up to a certain age, I think we will always choose belonging or fitting in over authenticity.
Mm.
Because we learn early on, if I'm too authentic and I scream too much, then I'm gonna have negative consequences and punishments, or just be told I'm too much, or I won't fit in and get the attention and affection I need. So instead, we I mean, this toddlers are doing this. They're starting to craft their personalities. They don't call it a personality. They're just saying, oh, this is what I need to do to get love and affection. I need to not behave in certain ways, and I need to behave more like this.
Hmm.
And so we develop in these ways that do prioritize fitting in. And I think there can be a balance of, well, how can I fit in? Because that is important in middle school and high school and in any school. You want to, get along with peers and have a healthy social life if you want that.
Hmm.
So there is a balance of, I think what I want to say to it to be able to do that is that you can still know what your authentic truth is, and you can still choose to do the thing to go along with other people if that feels okay to you.
Hmm.
But it's important to know that space, to give yourself that space and know that this isn't the truest expression for me, but it's what's available, and it's going to fulfill some needs of connection, and I'm going to choose to go to do this. And also, I know that in myself, I would rather be doing this other thing or uh, doing something else. And if it's more important, you can choose to do that other thing or just find other ways to lean into that and
Hmm.
start to grow your own community, start to grow your own collective around your authentic truth and expression. So I think there is very much a both and that we do need to fit in to some degree.
Yeah.
And I think there's also truth to the fact that the more authentic we can become, then the more we're going to attract other like-minded people that like what it is you're bringing. Because when you bring truth to the room, when you are fully yourself, it galvanizes people. It's like, oh, what's that person over there have? Like, they're showing up differently. They're much more relaxed. It's because they don't need to prove themselves.
Hmm.
They already proven themselves to themselves and they are at peace with themselves. So yeah, I think there's a both and there of how to appreciate your own authenticity and still do what you need to do to get your social needs met. Because not everyone in your life might know how to hold your authentic self. And maybe you don't want to blow up those relationships.
Yeah. It's not time yet, maybe, to let it go. But I love both and. I'm going to co-opt yes and both and into my future engagements because yeah, it has good value or the idea has good value. So thank you for that. I think one thought that you had presented to me in our pre-meets and so forth that I would like to bring out is and I'm truly ignorant as to what's going on here. I know probably my perhaps our grandparents' generation, people born in the 20s and in the early part of the 20th century, that going and seeking therapy would be almost shameful or, seen as being weak or whatever, aspersions it would cast on that, which I think is just I'm so sorry for that generation. They were very stern, strong folks, but yeah, probably a train wreck inside. A lot of stoicism on the outside, but yeah. Anyway, but I hope, and maybe I'm being overly optimistic, that as we've progressed into 2024 or wherever we are, that that's not so much an issue. But so would you address that and say, where do we stand? And so I would admit to the audience that I would love to go into therapy sometime and go talk to a therapist. I don't think it's a crisis thing for me, but I just love to check in with someone and say, hey, you know, why, and what do you think? But anyway, so I'll just start out with myself as an example that I would feel no shame or stigma. I'll say it publicly that, and I've said it to my wife. I said, yeah, I'd be happy to go to a therapist, and I will someday. So I'll shut up. And what do you think about the the generally perceived, culturally perceived idea of somebody seeking help going into therapy?
Yeah, I think the that older way of seeing therapy and viewing it is that you go to therapy if there's something wrong with you.
Hmm.
And I've heard that in my parents, grandparents' generation, even in my generation, that no, I don't need therapy. I'm fine. I'm fine. I can do everything by myself. I'm super individual. And
Hmm.
uh, that's just not true. You're not growing your own food. You're not building your own house. You're not
Yeah.
like making your own plumbing to bring water to your home. It's like we do live in relationship.
Yeah.
And it's I think it speaks to some of these cultural blocks to growth, to change, to continuing to move forward in evolution, really.
Hmm.
That there is that story that you should only see a therapist if there's something really wrong with you. Um, there's a lot of things wrong, okay? Like there's a lot wrong with life. Buddha's first noble truth, life is suffering. I heard one teacher say birth is traumatic and it's all downhill from there.
Yeah. Or we spend our adulthood trying to get over our childhood. I've heard that one before. So yeah,
Exactly.
truth. So anyway.
Yeah. So life is hard. I mean,
Hmm.
and it can actually be really rare to have a space where you can just be really honest
Hmm.
about all of it. And I think that, just like you would you go to the gym because your body is needing to get stronger. It's like, it's not that there's something wrong with you. It's just that you want your body to be stronger.
Mhm.
Do you also want your mental capacities and your emotional capacities to be strong enough to withstand the vicissitudes of life, to be able to navigate stressors, to be able to have hard conversations with your spouse and your parents and your children? Do you want to be able to tune into the the authentic expression of your heart to find where your creative potential and your offerings can be in this world? If if you do, then it's helpful to have a space where you can do that. And to think that, well, I can just figure it out on my own to some degree, but also I think our culture has just taught so many maladaptive ways to live that don't address our emotions, don't address our thoughts in a productive, healthy way. So we do need right now at this moment in time people that have some training, that have walked this path, that have gone up and down this mountain and know, well, here's what you do. Here are some ways to walk, to navigate this path of trauma. Here's a way to navigate this path of relationship. And we need those. We need people to be teaching and sharing and holding space so that others can learn those skills. And it's not, I mean, obviously I'm biased here, but I agree. I don't think it's a shameful thing. I think it's like the same reason you might hire a personal trainer, or you might uh, hire a car mechanic to work on your car because there's something wrong inside. It's not functioning optimally. Maybe you know in yourself that you're not functioning optimally. Maybe you're flying off the handle at small things, or maybe you're finding yourself just overwhelmed with fear. Maybe you're waking up at night and your thoughts are running. And it's like, okay, well, you don't have to continue that way. And there's actually things you can do, and it's helpful to have someone to be able to support you in finding alternative ways of being. So I don't know. How's that for a selling the notion of therapy?
Go therapy. Well, it seems, and this may be an arrogant statement on my part, and people can yell at me in the comments if they want, but it just seems natural what you just said to have a an impulse or a desire within you to afford yourself and treat yourself to through care to or love or compassion or whatever to want that for yourself, to want which again, in some instances, with chronic depression or whatever, we may not be able to lens it that way immediately. But that if you can, as you keep saying, check in with yourself, what's going on, and note that which is going on, and if it feels negatively affective or negatively valent, to use psych terms for a second, that you can then say, I may need to ask somebody else's opinion, and maybe a trusted loved one or a friend, and say, what do you think? And then they can sort of help you with a consensus there, and that can then lead you to that. So yeah, 100%. I think, in fact, I would advocate, and this is sort of happening. I get, there's like online therapy and all these kind of things, and I don't know, uh, something is uh, uh, something available to a broad population that they can have that. So there isn't that barrier of let's say going to a psychotherapist or something that may be expensive, it's perceived as being expensive. To me, it's great value, but it may be perceived. So that we can have steps to get us up to there. Um, I don't know what that looks like, but it's just, that we can feel as though it is accessible and apprehendable for us, that we can have it for ourselves. And that leads to a closing thought for that. And that is that if you do that, as you mentioned, rather than lashing out or projecting or overreacting or hurting, harming yourself emotionally or physically or whatever, that your uh, reverberance into the world, your relationality with the world as you are healing and transforming yourself, that you are then contributing positive ripples, if you will, something that you, in that cultivation of self-awareness and that self-care, can be a contributing person or a good faith actor in the world that can be part of a happier, healthier community or a more well-being oriented community. So I'll stop there. But yeah, I think, and so to you, I would ask that what do we see when we come out? family relationships and people on the street, driving down the road, and how we react and relate with the world as a result of therapy.
Yeah. Well, I think before I answer that, can I actually go back to the last question? Because there's another
Yeah.
piece that when
Hmm.
you were just speaking, I wanted to bring up again that I'm aware that I think some of the that notion that therapy is just it's something you do if there's something wrong with you. I think that's actually one of the surface defenses, and probably what's underneath that is that it's scary to go into a room or even meet online or over the phone with someone and say like, this is some painful stuff that happened to me, and this is some things that I'm doing in my life right now that I wish I wasn't doing so much. It's hard and it's scary, and I think that's probably underlying more of the resistance to therapy in the cultural sense, is that
Hmm.
it's uh it's scary. I mean, I get scared sometimes talking to my own therapist and telling some of the deeper stuff that's going on in my own life.
Hmm.
So that doesn't go away, but we learn that we can do it, that we can face that scary thing, and we have the strength and resilience and capacity to do it. So to this other question, what do you see as the result? What happens after that is that we learn that we can survive more than we think, and we can have more skills for both kind of preventatively not getting to certain situations. We can practice, having more boundaries. We can practice having being able to lean into certain yeses, and just being able to discern what's the difference. When do I really want to say yes? When do I really want to say no? And then what are some tools? How can I compassionately say yes and no? Um, and then there can be more peace when you want to do that, when you're out on the street and you see something and you want to go towards it, and then you are done with it and it's time to leave. You can leave more freely, more easily.
Hmm.
I guess really that word freedom is what therapy affords, is it cultivates the permission to live freely. There may be external circumstances that maybe you still need to pay the bills and you right now have to keep working a certain job, or maybe you're in another situation that you can't get out of for various reasons, or you're living somewhere, whatever it is. But there can be an internal freedom of recognizing that you can choose how to live given these circumstances. So, yes, these are the circumstances of my life, and here's how I'm going to live truest to me so that it can be the most fulfilling that it can be the most meaningful, and further the story somehow. Like, keep not just letting my life be this, I know my life, it's a tragedy. This is the story. It can be so much more. It can keep going. And I think that's what you can find through therapy, is that you can choose your own adventure a bit more. You can have more freedom to orient your life to your core values and your core truth.
Hmm. Hmm. And perhaps at the same time discover the core values and the truth, in authenticity, or feeling that, we're talking about parts and family systems, that aspect of yourself can be more emergent, and wow, you come in contact with that, versus the wounded warrior or the injured child, or the angry archetypal parent that's still haunting your space. That if you can find that resilient, uh, whatever superlatives we can throw out, whatever yours are, that wow, that, and I've had those moments, in my life, and being in contact with it, gives you that sort of drive to um, be curious, as you said, what started you on your journey to be curious about, well, what kind of expression of myself is in potential, and is latent and ready to be unlocked or awakened or whatever.
Yeah, because maybe
That's
we might be living out values that actually aren't ours.
mm,
They
mm,
was instilled from us through the school and through consumerism and through our parents and religion. And maybe those aren't true for you.
hmm. Hmm.
It can be helpful to kind of name it and see where is there some dissonance, some misalignment, and maybe what you didn't even know to question because it's just an assumption. This is the way the world works. Well, the world can work in many different ways.
Yeah, yeah. It's a very diverse place we occupy, and we're a very diverse species psychically. So yeah, the combinations that we can create, yeah, especially again in good headspace and in good heart space, to lens ourselves and to perspectively engage the world again as that parts or family systems aspect um, is in more um, harmonious relation. I don't want to say it's dominating, but it's in more harmonious relation with the metering with the other aspects of self. Believe it or not, we're north of a few minutes north of an hour. What I'd like to do is ask you, thus far, if there is something we haven't covered in this conversation that you want to bring out. We can go another 10 minutes or however you want to speak to something. But let's take that opportunity to cover something that maybe you want to have as part of this conversation. Before we bring it in for a landing, and because we've given a lot for the audience so far, but let's just see if there's anything you want to bring up
Yeah,
before we wrap it up.
we're kind of continuing this conversation around, going to a therapist. Should I do that or not?
Hmm.
Just want to say that there's a lot of different types of therapy, and the type of therapy that I found most effective and creates the lasting change is called somatic therapy.
Hmm.
So, that's been infused throughout this conversation, but just to make it more explicit here, somatic means of or relating to the body. So, for instance, you might think of an emotion like anxiety, and everyone can have a sense of what that is. But if we try to sink our teeth into it, it's actually pretty tough. Like anxiety is this kind of amorphous blob of worry and dread and concern about the future, about what happened in the past, and just this bleh kind of thing. So that's like we all have a sense of it, but in somatic therapy, what we're going to be doing is getting much deeper into this, this know thyself actually immediately, directly in your body as you are yourself right now. So if you're talking about anxiety, if you're feeling it, what's telling you you're feeling anxiety? What's happening on a sensation level in your body? And maybe you notice there's a pit in your stomach, or weight on your shoulders, or you're hunched over, or your mind is scattered and you're not able to stay present, you're dissociating. Once we notice what's happening on that sensation level, then there are things we can do to work with that. Then the emotion itself becomes more manageable, becomes workable. We can breathe into the lower belly. We can do some heart opening exercises for the hunched over feeling or the weight in the shoulders. You can do some shoulder rolls.
Hmm.
And so the reason that I love working somatically is because it actually gets to the root of the emotion. We label it anxiety after we have that sensation, but what's really going on is that we are reacting to a sensation in our body. So once you notice that and you start to tune into the sensations, then a lot can open up. And again, this is when the emotions can start to sequence and process, and you find that they have a short lifespan because you can move through the physical sensation of it. Um, And that's also when we can get in touch with younger parts that maybe, like when I feel hunched over, I feel small and I feel like I'm 7 years old again.
Hmm.
So now the 7-year-old self is in the room. What does the 7-year-old want to say here?
Hmm.
We can start to dialogue and update these parts of ourself. And I find that working with the body is the best way that I found to be able to integrate some of these changes. In traditional talk therapy, you might have great insights about this is why I am the way I am, and this is what I need to do differently in my life. But we're still often going to be reacting and interacting from an embodied, unconscious place.
Hmm.
So that's why working with the body can get underneath not just the conceptual understanding, but then this is what it's like. This is what it feels like to act differently, to let the inner CEO, instead of my inner 7-year-old, lead the meeting.
Yeah.
And it's a different felt sense. I mean, you can feel your body get bigger. You can feel your body become the size of the universe. You can
Mm.
feel yourself with more alignment and more uprightness. Um, so when you are in a different state, then your actions are going to come out differently. And so it's this sort of like energetic somatic massage that happens through just being in tune with your sensations.
Mm-hmm.
So if anyone is interested in therapy, I would suggest that specific kind of model of someone that works somatically, and especially a trauma therapist, because there's always trauma, and working with trauma just means that we can hold the more of the fullness of the human experience. So, yeah, I just wanted to bring in that notion of working with the body and how that can help integrate the concepts, the insights you might have in a way that you can actually live practically and move through life. As Rolfer Jeffrey Maitland called it, psychospatial beings.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's nice. I like that. I like that. And thank you for sort of reinforcing the idea of somatic therapy. Excuse me. Now, I will have in the description field or the show notes all of the necessary links to connect with you or to access, for people to discover you and then to find you further. But in relation to that, is there anything you want to speak to the audience to say, when you contact me or how you contact me or what I have available? If you want to speak to that for a moment, and then we'll let the audience go and let them ponder what you've talked about.
Absolutely. Maybe I should have said this at the beginning, but my business is called The Integrated Self.
Okay.
It's my therapy coaching practice. So you can find me on my website on those links. I have writings about a lot of this stuff that could be interesting to read some of that on the website. I do offer, if you resonate with me, I think it is important to find, if you're going to work with someone one-on-one, to find someone that you resonate with, that you have
Mm,
a feeling about, that like you can be comfortable with. There's enough discomfort in life already that it's helpful to
mhm.
have some elements that you can be comfortable with. So finding a practitioner you feel a good match with is important. And if you feel that with me, I do offer therapy to clients living in Colorado. I offer somatic coaching sessions worldwide over video or phone. So if you're interested in working with me one-on-one, then you're welcome to reach out. And also for anyone that's curious about like what happens in the therapeutic container, or a healing container. I have an online course that's called Feel Good, which basically it's kind of the first tool I teach a lot of my clients. And it's how to get into the body, not by feeling all the pain and woundings of your past, but actually how to get into your body by feeling good, by
Mm.
feeling relief and pleasure and joy and a sense of safety and security in your own being. And without that, real change isn't possible. So if you're curious about a path of self-growth and personal healing and transformation, I would suggest checking out this online course. It's right now it's on sale for $27. So uh I think that's much more affordable than ongoing therapy.
Mm.
So it's be a good starting place to just learn some tools you can do for yourself without needing to share personal details about your life with a stranger. Um, so you can check that out. And I also share a lot on the social medias. I share on kind of do these short videos with insights on TikTok, on Instagram, and Facebook as well. So all those links are on my website.
Okay, perfect. And again, I'll have those down in the description field so that people can access you. And when I do my post-production slideshow, I will mention your practice and and have that, because you said, oh, maybe I should have said this in the beginning, but I'll cover that in the post and make sure that it's there for you. So, Dan, I really appreciate this conversation. I think one of the uh, undergirdings of this show is helping with discovery of modes, means, and facilitation of healing, and in the aftermath of that, or if that's not too strong of a word, the striving for well-being and the seeking of authentic whatever it is that you're after, that is healthy, positive affect, all these wonderful things that I would hope that one would aspire to. So I appreciate you engaging me and the audience with your thoughts and getting some ideas from you. I'll say goodbye to you after we're done, or after I stop the record button. To the YouTube audience and the Spotify audience, thank you guys so much for your time. I appreciate it. Again, everything to find Dan will be down below. And if you're on Spotify, I think there is in show notes there. There's a means that I can put links. Yeah, yeah, there is. I'm so new to it. I have to kind of remind myself. So forgive the sloppiness there. So, all right. Thank you again, YouTube audience. And like I said, Dan, you and I'll talk after this. Bye bye, everyone.
Thanks, Al.